The Appalachian Mountains are older than the roads that wind through them, older than the cabins rotting in their hollows, and older still than the secrets people whisper in the dark. Among the many rumors that stain these hills, one name refuses to die, even though no one dares to speak it too loudly: the Harlow family. The story begins, not with the past, but with the present. In 2019, a pair of hikers from Asheville, North Carolina, strayed from the trail in a remote stretch of the Blue Ridge Range. According to the recovered footage on their camera, they stumbled across something unnatural: a collapsed farmhouse hidden by ivy, its windows blackened and the roof sagging inward. What made the footage unsettling wasn't the building itself, it was the noises in the background: faint cries, muffled groans, something human, yet not. The hikers vanished. Their car was later found abandoned at the trailhead, keys still in the ignition. Search teams combed the area for weeks, but found nothing, save for a half-buried jar filled with hair and teeth. When locals saw the jar, some refused to speak. Others muttered a single name: Harlow. But who were the Harlows? Why did their name carry such dread? To answer that, we must travel back more than a century, to the late 1800s, when the Harlow family first cut themselves off from the world. The Harlows had arrived in Appalachia in the aftermath of the Civil War. Broken, poor, and bitter, they sought isolation, building a crude homestead deep in a hollow where the sun barely reached. Unlike other mountain folk who formed tight-knit communities for survival, the Harlows wanted nothing to do with outsiders. They farmed just enough to survive, hunted relentlessly, and raised generation after generation within their own bloodline. Over decades, their features twisted, their bodies weakened, but their cruelty only grew sharper. By the early 1900s, travelers through the region began whispering about the strange family in the hills. Stories spread of malformed children glimpsed at dusk, of smoke rising from the Harlow chimney long after midnight, and of missing livestock that locals swore had been dragged into the trees by something with human hands. The family was rarely seen, but when they were, they carried with them an aura of wrongness. One of the earliest written accounts comes from a preacher named Reverend Wilcox. In 1907, he claimed that while traveling through the mountains, he was offered shelter by a pale, hollow-eyed woman who smelled of rot and spoke with a tongue too thick for her mouth. When he awoke, his shoes were missing, along with his Bible. More disturbingly, he swore that several small figures crouched outside the window all night, whispering in unison. He fled at dawn and never returned. But the Harlows didn't merely terrify passers-by, they turned on their own. Isolated in their hollow, they began practicing strange rites. Oral accounts from neighboring families described chants carried on the wind, grotesque effigies made of bone and clay left hanging in the trees, and fires that burned for days at a time without explanation. Some claimed the Harlows believed they could summon the spirits of the land to protect their bloodline. Others said they weren't summoning anything, they were feeding it. As the decades passed, the Harlows became something less than human. By the 1950s, when Appalachia began modernizing with new roads, electricity, and logging operations, the Harlows remained frozen in time. Locals avoided their hollow entirely. Children were warned, "Don't go near Harlow land, or you won't come back." And yet, inevitably, people did. Hunters chasing game, drifters passing through, even lawmen, on occasion. Some returned, shaken and unwilling to speak. Others didn't return at all. One chilling account came from 1964, when two brothers from Tennessee tried to hunt in the hollow. According to the surviving brother's testimony, they were stalked for hours by unseen figures. He described hearing rustling in the trees, guttural laughter, and the sound of footsteps that stopped when they stopped. As night fell, they stumbled upon a crude pit lined with sharpened stakes, filled with animal bones and something else: skulls, human, small, and malformed. The surviving brother barely escaped. His sibling's body was never recovered, The Harlows were never confronted directly by the law. Every time an investigation was mounted, it ended abruptly. Deputies refused to enter the hollow, citing superstition. Officials claimed the family had moved on, but the fires kept burning in those hills, and every so often, a traveler would vanish. By the 1980s, the Harlows had become less a family and more a legend. Parents used them as a cautionary tale, warning children to stay close to home. Campfire stories turned them into monsters feral, eyeless, crawling on all fours. But those who had glimpsed them knew the truth. The Harlows were no myth. They were flesh and blood, twisted by centuries of isolation and inbreeding, shaped into grotesque caricatures of humanity. And then, suddenly, silence. In the early 2000s, the fires went out. No more sightings. No more disappearances tied to the hollow. Some dared to hope the Harlows had died off, their bloodline extinguished, but others whispered that they were still there, hiding in the ruins of their farmhouse, watching, waiting. Which brings us back to 2019, and the hikers who vanished. When search parties investigated the Harlow Hollow, they found signs of recent habitation. Freshly broken branches, ashes from a fire no more than a week old, and in the ruins of the farmhouse, carved into the walls, was a message. Blood never ends. To this day, no one knows what became of the hikers. Their footage is locked away, suppressed by authorities. But locals continue to avoid the hollow, especially at night, when they say you can hear faint chanting drifting on the wind. Some insist the Harlows still live, abandoned by the world but clinging to their grotesque secrets. Others believe something far worse, that the Harlows are gone, but whatever they worshipped is still there, and that is only the beginning of the Harlow story. By the mid-1900s, whispers of the Harlows had already cemented them as boogeymen in Appalachian folklore. But those who dared to dig deeper, local historians, journalists, and even folklorists, uncovered disturbing fragments that suggested the Harlows were not simply degenerates, lost to inbreeding and isolation. There was something older, darker, and far more deliberate behind their ways of life. The first piece of evidence came from the journals of Dr. Edwin Kearns, a physician who worked in rural Virginia during the 1920s, called upon to examine strange children born to a family in the hills. Kearns described the Harlows in clinical detail. His notes told of infants born with twisted limbs, extra digits, or faces so malformed they could not breathe without effort. Yet, shockingly, the family viewed these children not as burdens, but as blessings. According to Kearns, one of the Harlow patriarchs told him plainly, "The more broken the flesh, the closer it is to God." Kearns fled after only 2 nights in the hollow, abandoning his medical bag in terror. He never published his findings during his lifetime, but his journals, unearthed decades later, offered one of the clearest windows into the grotesque theology of the Harlow clan. The family believed that deformity was sacred, that each imperfection was a mark of divine favor, proof of their chosen status. As their bloodline warped, so too did their worship. But what were they worshiping? That question leads us to the ritual pits. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, loggers who ventured near Harlow land reported strange clearings in the woods. At the center of these clearings were deep pits filled with bones, ash, and melted wax. At first they assumed it was the work of old-time folk magic Appalachian traditions of conjure and warding. But one logger described something he could not explain. Dozens of small wooden idols, carved with faces too wide and eyes too hollow, all facing inward, toward the pit. When he tried to take one home, he claimed his dreams turned violent. He awoke to the sound of scratching outside his cabin window for 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, he returned the idol. The scratching stopped. Whatever the Harlows were doing in those pits, it wasn't simple superstition. It was ritual. A far more chilling piece of evidence emerged in 1972, when a group of teenagers from Roanoke decided to explore the hollow on a dare. Only one of them made it back. His testimony, though disjointed and riddled with trauma, was enough to terrify his entire community. He described finding the farmhouse not abandoned, but alive with firelight. From the tree line, they spied a gathering of figures around a bonfire. Men, women, children, grotesquely thin, with pale, scarred skin, and faces misshapen by generations of inbreeding. They were chanting in unison, words the boy could not understand, punctuated by the rhythmic beating of sticks against the earth. Then came the offering. One of the Harlows dragged something from the shadows. At first, the boy thought it was a deer. Then he saw the hands. Human. What happened next, he refused to describe in detail. But his final words to investigators were, they didn't eat because they were hungry. They ate because they believed they had to. The boy was institutionalized shortly after. The other teens were never found. From this point forward, the Harlow legend took a darker turn. They were no longer seen as merely an inbred, isolated family. They were regarded as a cult, a clan of ritualistic cannibals who believed their grotesque practices connected them to something greater, something lurking in the mountains themselves. But here's where the story shifts again. In the late 1990s, a series of wildfires tore through that section of the Blue Ridge. Local firefighters reported stumbling across ruins, deep in the hollow, scorched cabins, collapsed outbuildings, and an underground cellar filled with bones blackened by fire. And yet, curiously, no human remains could be positively identified among them. Had the fire finally destroyed the Harlow bloodline, or had they fled deeper into the mountains, abandoning their ancestral home only to continue their rites elsewhere? The answer may lie in a chilling discovery made in 2006. A group of spelunkers exploring an uncharted cave system a few miles from the original Harlow homestead found crude drawings etched into the stone. The images were unmistakably human in origin, but distorted stick-like figures with elongated limbs and hollow faces, all bowing before a towering form with no features, save for a wide, gaping mouth. Near the drawings lay remnants of bone necklaces, teeth strung together on twine, and jars of some dark, tar-like substance sealed with animal hide. Experts later dated the artifacts to the early 20th century, lining perfectly with the Harlow clan's peak years of activity. But the implication was chilling. The Harlows had not simply vanished. They had gone underground literally. The Harlows may not just be a grotesque family, warped by blood and isolation. They may have been disciples of something older than themselves, something buried in the Appalachian earth long before the first settlers ever arrived. And if that is true, then the hikers of 2019, and others who have disappeared since, weren't simply victims of a degenerate family. They were offerings. The first modern case tied to them came in 2019, when hikers from North Carolina went missing on the Appalachian Trail. Search parties combed the hills for days. Most of what they found could be explained: broken branches, boot prints, even blood traces leading toward an old gully. But what they found at the base of that gully turned speculation into horror. Pinned into the earth with sharpened sticks were animal hides, tanned and stretched, marked with symbols burned into the flesh. These weren't random markings, they mirrored the cave etchings linked to the Harlow clan decades earlier. Investigators refused to release photographs, but one searcher anonymously described it as like a warning or an invitation. The hikers were never recovered. In 2021, another chilling incident surfaced. A survivalist YouTuber, known for documenting abandoned places in Appalachia, live-streamed his exploration of what he described as a burned-out farmhouse that the locals won't even mention by name. The stream began normally dilapidated walls, graffiti left by other trespassers, evidence of animal nests. But around the 27-minute mark, his tone changed. He whispered, "Someone's downstairs." The camera shifted toward a half-collapsed stairwell. Viewers claim they heard faint scratching, followed by something like labored breathing. The feed cut abruptly to static. His channel has never been active since. His body was never found. Skeptics call these stories folklore, born from Appalachia's dark imagination. Yet, others point to the continuity of detail, the same symbols, the same grotesque depictions, the same whispered word that keeps surfacing in reports the Harlows. But who, or what, are the Harlows now? Some folklorists suggest the surviving family members adapted, no longer tied to the burned farmhouse or obvious homesteads, but moving like phantoms through the wooded ranges, scavenging, capturing, and offering sacrifices to whatever entity their ancestors once bowed to. If true, it would explain why disappearances continue in the same area without resolution. Others go further, suggesting the Harlows themselves ceased to be entirely human. The prolonged inbreeding, ritual, cannibalism, and occult devotion weren't merely signs of decays. They were a deliberate transformation. The Harlows weren't worshipping something buried in Appalachia. They were becoming it. Evidence for this theory lies in a chilling encounter from 2022. A local hunter, long accustomed to the backwoods, reported being stalked during a night hunt. At first, he assumed coyotes. Then he heard the voices. Not animal sounds, human voices. A chorus of them, muttering broken phrases, echoing through the trees. When his flashlight caught movement, he saw pale shapes darting between trunks. Not deer, not coyotes, but bent, skeletal figures, moving on all fours. He fired a warning shot. The voices stopped. Then, he claimed, every sound in the forest died. No crickets, no owls, only silence. What he saw next nearly drove him mad. A figure, emaciated and wrong, standing just yards away. Its skin was stretched taut, its face disfigured beyond recognition, yet its mouth was unmistakably human. It whispered his name. The hunter abandoned his gear and fled. When he returned the next morning with others, his belongings were gone, and in their place was a bundle of sticks bound with animal sinew. The bundle was arranged in the shape of a mouth. Whether the Harlows are still flesh and blood descendants, or something less definable, grotesque and liminal, their presence lingers. The hollow where they once thrived remains avoided. Hikers still vanish. Hunters still hear the muttering. Locals still tell children never to follow voices in the woods, no matter how familiar they sound. And perhaps the most disturbing part, the land itself seems to resist forgetting them. Structures collapse, fires rage, evidence burns, but always, something is left behind. Journals, carvings, remains that whisper the same grotesque secret. The Harlow bloodline never died, it only changed. And if you ever find yourself in that part of Appalachia, deep in the valleys where even animals refuse to linger, remember this: the silence is not empty. The silence is watching. Because the abandoned do not always stay abandoned. Sometimes, they wait. And if you thought the Harlows were the darkest family Appalachia had to offer, you're wrong. What you've heard tonight is only a glimpse of the horrors hidden in these mountains. Because deep in the same hills, another bloodline carved their reign of terror with even more brutality, and their secrets make the Harlows look almost tame. If you're brave enough to descend further into Appalachia's most cursed families, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, and tell me in the comments if you'd dare to set foot anywhere near Harlow Hollow. Because next time, the nightmare only grows darker, and the truth will follow you home.